friends, Jerry Rosa here in the Rosa String Works Workshop. Can you say shop talk? I knew you could. Just a little takeoff on old Mr. Rogers there. You know, I never was a huge fan of Mr. Rogers, but you know, this world would be a whole lot better off if we had more Mr. Rogers and fewer knuckleheads. And by knuckleheads, you can take that meaning almost any way you want. Stretch it all the way out there to those crazy terrorist people even. Got a pretty good shop talk for you today. I think we're going to cover several topics about instruments, basically by your request from the last shop talk in the comments. But we also have a varied program for you today too. We've got some more on some mushrooms. We'll talk about some other miscellaneous things, point you in different directions. So I think you'll enjoy it. Since this channel is mostly about musical instruments, we'll start off with one of those topics that people raised in the last shop talk. And that is, someone asked me to talk about belly bulges. You know, I guess maybe what causes them and what you can do about them and that kind of thing. Well, if you don't know what even a belly bulge is, it's where the top is bellying up. The top gets pulled up, generally right at the bridge. Might as well show you the status of the 12 string here. It's, as you can see, hasn't progressed too much further. Still working on it. But the belly bulge happens right here. And, you know, the strings are pulling up here with a lot of force. And you ask 100 people how much force is there, you'll get 100 different answers. Let's just say it's a whole lot of force. Many foot-pounds per string are applied right here. And when you think about the fact that this is a soft wood, number one. Number two, it's you know, it's only like 1/8 inch thick. That's thick. That's 125 thousandths. That would be more thick than most tops. Most tops are around 100 thousandths, so it's less than an 1/8 inch thick by quite a bit. And if you don't know what 100 thousandths is, if you can't relate to that, in the U.S., that would be 1/10 of an inch, which may not help you that much more either. But then in the U.K. or the millimeter land countries, it would be about, let's see, 2.5 millimeters, something like that. So that's how thick these tops are. Very, very thin. And it's a soft wood to boot. So with, you know, if you think of the hundreds of foot-pounds of pressure that are being pulled up here, it's amazing that any of them can stay flat. So what causes them to bulge? What causes some to bulge and some to perhaps stay flat? And what can be done about all that? Well, one of the first obvious causes would be just using way too heavy strings. I'm kind of a proponent. I didn't used to be this guy. I used to be the guy that would say, use the heavy strings. I still do on a mandolin, as long as the mandolin is built well. But on a guitar, I used to say, you know, be sure to use at least medium strings and etc. I never really thought heavies were a good idea on a guitar, but mediums for sure. Well, I'm kind of changing my tune on that over the years, and I'm really leaning toward the lighter strings on the guitars, on most guitars. And a lot of people will just argue straight in the face and say, you can't put light strings on a D28 Martin guitar, it wrecks the sound. Well, I haven't heard it wreck the sound. I think they sound great with light strings on them. And if you just give it a chance, you might change your tune also. You'd be surprised what they sound like. Now, the quality of your string makes a huge difference. You know, I personally don't think you can beat the sound of the phosphor bronze strings. Now, I'm talking uncoated. Once they're coated, the sound kind of changes a little bit. I'm not a big fan of the coated sound. Granted, the coated strings last much longer. You know, there's some advantages to coated strings. I'm not saying there aren't. I'm just talking about my personal preference. I prefer to hear the phosphor bronze strings. I prefer to hear them in the light now over the medium. Sure, the medium sounds great. It gives you a little bit more volume, but hardly enough to care about. try the light strings. You'll be doing that belly bulge a lot of help. Anytime you can lighten the string up, then it takes a little bit less tension to bring it up to pitch. And we're really only talking small amounts here. The difference between a 56 and a 54 is only 0.02 of an inch. That's half the thickness of a human hair. So, come on guys, it's not like it's changing the world, but it does change the amount of pressure you have to put on your top. So, that's your first obvious reason, is your strings are heavy for your guitar. Some guitars are actually designed to have light strings on them. You can look inside them, and if you got real dainty bracing and stuff on the inside, you better be using light strings. Even the scalloped bracing on those D28s, I think you should be using light strings on those. If you've really scalloped your braces a lot, you're asking for belly bulge, it's just like building anything in the world. If you build it strong enough, it's going to hold up, and if you don't build it up strong enough, it's going to fail. And so that's the second reason, really, why belly bulges happen. They're not built to handle the stress. And a lot of the cheap guitars, I'm not going to name any names because I don't really want to hurt anybody's feelings out there. But a lot of the cheaper guitars, the ones you pay less money for, if you really want to get right down to it, they're built differently. I'm not saying they all are, because they're not. Some of them are built real well. But some of the cheaper guitars are built really cheap in the area of bracing. A lot of the older cheap guitars especially just had a few ladder braces across the top. And that's just not as strong. A lot of the guitars have a very small bridge plate. That's just not as strong. Your bridge plate ought to be, in my opinion, at least as big as your bridge, and probably should extend beyond your bridge just a little bit. That makes it a lot stronger. The quality of your bridge plate, of the wood, makes a difference. If you just use some slab sawn, lightweight, especially softwood, it's just not going to be as strong as if you use a good quality quarter sawn piece of wood in that bridge plate area, like a piece of Padauk or rosewood or something along those lines. It's a much stronger wood. Keep in mind, those Padauks and rosewood ring really well, transfer sound really well. That's why they use them in xylophones and marimbas and things like that. You tap those notes and they just ring. So you're not hurting your instrument by going to a hardwood in that area, especially if you're building your own instrument. I encourage you very strongly to to go past the plans and put yourself in a real good piece of quarter sawn, either Padauk or rosewood in the bridge plate area. Some of the higher end guitars have that already. Those are the main reasons why you have belly bulges and things. If other kind of off to the side reasons, if you will, they're not the main reasons, would be if you really have a poor neck angle and your strings are really high anyway, well, that just increases the pull up on your top, and it's just going to pull that much harder too. If you keep everything nice and flat, then you're pulling lengthways across the top is much stronger than when you're lifting on the top. And I'm exaggerating that, of course, but that is a factor. So that real high action, that neck angle that's wrong is going to create more, especially again, if you're still using medium or heavy strings, it's definitely going to pull on your top a lot. And, I didn't really exactly say don't use heavy strings on your acoustic guitar, but let me just make that clear. Don't use heavy strings on your acoustic guitar, period. Okay, just so we are clear about that. Don't do it. You are asking for trouble. I don't know of a single acoustic guitar on the planet that's really built to have heavy strings. I haven't seen one. I'm sure they probably exist, and someone will probably send me a link to one, but that's okay. I'm telling you to use mediums at your very heaviest, and I'm really suggesting that you give lights a try if you've never tried lights. You'll be doing your guitar a big favor, and I doubt seriously in a blind test you would be able to tell the difference. If you were just sitting out there in the audience listening, I just about guarantee you would not be able to tell the difference between the lights and the mediums on the sound. Here's an idea right here. This is a Martin, and it's a, what is this even? I didn't even look. HD 35. This is a Martin HD 35. And now that's a 35, okay? And people kind of associate the numbers, I think, to strength to some degree. I don't know why, but they tend to, at least in discussions I've had with people. This is really built almost identical to a 28. The main difference being that the back has a 3-piece. That's the biggest difference between a 28 and this one. Right on the bracing inside here, and I don't think the camera will pick this up. I'll try to get it where you can see it, but I doubt it. If you see the white, this white thing going this way, down here, about right in here, it says, and I'll see if I can point it where you can see it. I doubt it. I think you can see it there. Just barely, maybe. But what that says is use medium gauge or lighter strings, and then it says only. You know, that rules out heavies right there for sure. And medium or lighter is a good idea. Now this one, just looking in here, looks to be well braced. I don't see any scalloping. I don't have a mirror to look in there really well, but right now, just based on that, I would say if it's not scalloped, you'll probably be all right with your mediums, but I would tend to even use lights on this. So, and when I say lights, I don't mean the extra lights. I just mean the lights, like the 54s to, I think they go down to 12s or something like that, 54 to 12s, versus 13s to 56. So you're not talking about a huge difference, but I seriously really would recommend you give them a try if you haven't tried them. It's just good for the longevity and the life of your guitar. Well, I think that covers everything I was planning to talk about on the Belly Bulge. If you have additional questions, put those in the comments and I'll try to address them. And so the theme of this Shop Talk, as I mentioned, is to cover a lot of multiple topics. And so the next topic that's kind of off subject is about the Morrell mushrooms again. I thought I'd just show you a few pictures of some of my finds, and I want to dispel one more myth, and this will probably help some of you who are out there looking for them. You will hear over and over and over, you got to look in the bottomlands, you got to look in the swampy areas, you got to look, you know, where it's really wet, you know, those kinds of things, rotten wood, etc. and so forth. Let me explain to you. At least here in the Ozarks. Now, our ground here is exceptionally rocky. I'm telling you for sure, you can find them anywhere. When I say anywhere, I pretty much mean anywhere. Now, there's one key element that I'll get back into here, and you've heard me say it before. But I just wanted to point out that this week I went out looking and I climbed, well, I actually started up the valley right behind my house, and I think I'll cut to a clip here in a minute and you'll see that. But I started out right up the valley and going right along a creek and checking all the way up to the end of my property and found one mushroom. Now that's down in a low area, water running through, you know, it's damp, you know, the water coming off the hills keeps it damp. One mushroom. Climbed up the hill, got nearly to the top. And it's a long hill, trust me. I mean, it's probably at least 3 football fields to the top. And it's an angle like this. I mean, it's a steep angle. It's steeper than your roof on your house. And anyway, so I'm climbing that all the way up to the top, looking, and what's that other element I was telling you that you need to look for? elm trees. I've mentioned it before, but elm trees are your key. Start looking around all your elm trees. Now, you will occasionally find them around other trees too, at least in this area. I'm talking the Ozarks now. You know, I don't know what it's like in North Carolina, okay? But I would assume it's similar. So when I got almost to the top here, I'm, you know, probably 75 yards further to the top. I found a little grove of elm trees, and I found 30-some mushrooms right just in that little area right there. Now that's way up high on a rocky hillside. So that ought to dispel the myth that it has to be down in the low ground and it has to be in the moisture areas. The one other thing I just wanted to say about that is, in fact, I don't honestly recall ever finding a mushroom growing in standing water. I don't think I've ever seen that. I'm not saying it couldn't happen. I'm not saying it could, you know, that it doesn't happen. I'm just saying I personally don't recall ever finding a mushroom in those areas in that condition. I found them in, you know, very moist areas, real close to standing water, but I've never found them where they're, you know, in some shallow water or any kind of a marshy, swampy thing. They like moist ground, but they don't like necessarily standing water or really swampy ground. So anyway, that might help you find them. Here's some clips that you might enjoy. Hunting for mushrooms on my property and came across this hog wallow. Now this is old. This is probably at least a year old actually. But I just give you an idea that what the hogs do to the property. They'll, you know, find a damp spot and keep rolling in it until it makes a little pond, and then, you know, if they're in the area, they'll still visit it. Right now, I don't think there's too many in our area, but I just thought I'd show you that, give you an idea what they look like, what a hog wallow looks like. Again, out mushroom hunting, this is what an elm tree bark looks like. That big tree right there. And they grow tall, big trees, and if you don't look around the base of elm trees, you're doing yourself an injustice. Take a look at that. Right there, that's a big one. And right behind it, up over there, a tiny one. It's really hard to see that one, but it's a tiny one right in there. And I haven't looked around much. There's an older one over here. It's gotten dark. I just walked up on this tree, so it's the first time I've looked at it this season for sure. I think I remember seeing this tree once before. Oh, there's another little one right here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 right here without even moving. So my point is, if you don't look around elm trees, you're missing the boat. Point out one more thing. If you see these little weird mushrooms here, they're kind of, I don't know, some kind of fungus. I don't know what they are. But if you find these in the area, it's very likely that you're in an area that morel mushrooms could grow. So I find those a lot where I find morels. I'm not saying it's not a requirement, but it's more of a hint that if you're in that area, you're in a good area. See, there's that elm tree, and right here is where we found those weird mushrooms. So my point is, if you see those, get your feelers out, because you could be in morel country. Yet a bit more evidence. Here's a little cluster of some elms. That's elm, elm, and elm. And right down here is a morel mushroom. Can you see it yet? Right up against that little stick. So there you go. This is our backyard, and I found one mushroom, back there about just into those trees about 50 yards. That's down in this low valley. All of the rest of the mushrooms that I'm about to show you were found way up high on that ridge. And when I say way up high, that may not look that high, but it's a couple of football fields up to the top. I would say maybe 3 football fields, 300 yards up to the top of that hill. And it's pretty steep in, I don't know, if you're standing 6 foot tall, facing up the hill
you probably only have to go 15 feet and it would be at your height. So it's climbing 6 feet and 15 feet. It's pretty dang steep. Well, it's another 33 mushrooms. And all but one was found way up on a hillside. So that should dispel the myth that they're always in the low-lying areas. In fact, I think it was either this one or maybe this one. It was one of these skinny, tall ones that I found in the valley. All the rest of them were found up on the hillside. These two, I don't know why they're so dark. They actually don't feel dry, like they feel totally moist. Maybe they survived that freezing temperature. Maybe they were out there during that freezing temperature. I don't know. The rest of them all appear to be real fresh. These appear to be older, but they're not dried out at all, which is kind of unusual. Usually when they're dark like this, they're very dry and hard.
Well, the next off subject, would be, several shop talks ago, I talked about sharpening things and sharpening even more blades. Well, one of the things I got a little flack on was I didn't show how I took the mower blades off. And I thought, every mower's different, but really they're all the same in a sense, because they pretty much all have a central bolt that holds the blade on. And I started to change my blades on our lawn tractor for my wife, because she loves to cut grass, as I've mentioned, and you hear her in the background of the videos all the time cutting grass. Anyway, I thought, as I started to change the blades on that tractor, I thought, hey, you might get a kick out of seeing how I do it, because it is a little different than your average. So here's some clips of that I thought you might enjoy. My friends, I thought I would show you how I change the blades on my wife's lawn tractor. Melissa was the one that told me that I didn't show how to change the blades. I should show how to change the blades too. And I thought, well, every tractor's different and everybody has a different method. But I thought my method is pretty unique, so I thought I'd just show it to you. If you would just look up here at the top, you can see there's a winch up there. And there's a cable running down to a little tab I have welded on the front of the tractor there. And so all I have to do is this. And that pretty much gives me access to the blades under there. Otherwise, it's a real pain in the neck. You're dealing with jacks and everything else. Now granted, this cable could break. I realize that. So I always put something under here so that if it would fall, it would at least stop at this level here. I know that's not even the best way to do it, but at least it's better than letting it fall all the way to the ground with the possibility of me being under there. And what I do is I take my spectacular Harbor Freight impact wrenches, and these babies are solid now. I'm telling you, they really are. I'm impressed with how strong these things are, and I'll show you how I take the blades off here in just a minute. This is the Earthquake 20 volt. This is the one with the extended reach here. You don't really need that extended reach. It was just the only one they had in stock the day I went to get one, so I got that. I kind of wish I didn't have that. She's got wire tangled up around her blades here, and that's one of the reasons I'm changing this. But there is a lot of like baling wire tangled up around this. So anyway, see how easy. And by the way, I'm not really under this. It may look like it in the camera, but I'm actually back a little ways so that if it does fall, I'm kind of out of harm's way. But this thing has so much torque. I cannot believe how much torque this has. So if you need a good impact wrench, I really do recommend these. They work great. I mean, it just makes such short work of it compared to doing it any other way. I've got the 3 sharpened blades here, and so I'll go ahead. Now, it's very important that the shiny, sharpened side is up. In other words, up toward the deck. The flat side of the blade is down. Very important. If you turn it the other way, you have your blade on upside down, and you will not be cutting anything. Your blade will be turning backwards, in fact, which would not be a good thing. I'm putting them all the way in pretty much by hand. I could run them up with the machine, but I like to get them snug before I do that. And I just noticed that I actually didn't put the second washer on this one, so I'm taking it back off real quick. Okay, so they're all back in there. Now we'll tighten them up. This thing is really goes tight. Very strong, very strong. Really makes them very tight. So I'll get the jack stands out of the way. And all I gotta do now is push the button to let it down. We're done. I might also add, for you guys that have these winches with the cable, I built myself a weight that I hang on this, so that when I'm putting it back up in the air, this keeps the line straight and it doesn't get all coiled up and kinked up there. Anyway, that's how I do it. Oh, did I mention the Rosa Stringworks t-shirts? Get you some. Go to www.rosastringworks.com and click on the for sale page. By the way, Ron's been busy. We just got in a whole bunch more deer antler saddles for the mandolin. And they're available as well. I have one in a left-handed model in case someone needs a left-handed one. I just thought I'd mention also that we don't sell the nuts for the mandolins, we don't sell the nuts for the guitars, we don't sell saddles for the guitars either. And the reason is all of those 3 things have to be fitted to that instrument. In other words, if the instrument's in the shop, I'll make one custom for that instrument, but I don't make them and send them out to people. I just can't keep up with all the stuff we've got to do as it is, let alone making those things and sending them out. The next topic that came up on the last Shop Talk was about finishes. Now, on one hand, I would say I'm probably far from an expert on the finish thing. On the other hand, I know something about that. I don't claim to be the best source on your information for your finishes. So just understand that right now. I only use 2 kinds of finish. One is an oil varnish and the other is a nitrocellulose lacquer. That's all I use. There are many other kinds of finishes out there. For instance, and lots of people swear by this, and it's a good finish. Acoustically especially, it's a very good finish. And that is the hand rub French polish finishes, like where they use alcohol and shellac. And it's a very, very good acoustically sounding finish. So I just want to get that out there first. But I don't use it, and I won't use it because of the other side of the coin, and that is it's not very durable, it's easy to scratch, and the worst part of it for me is the moisture issue. If you sweat on it, lay your arm on it, it will turn milky white. So that's why I don't do the French polishing thing. It's a great finish in terms of sound, it's a great finish in terms of looks. But it's not very durable in my opinion, and that's why I don't use it. So why do I use the oil varnish and the nitrocellulose lacquer? Well, I guess the easiest way I can explain that is because they're tried and true. We know they work, we know they're durable, we know they last, we know they sound good. Why don't I use something like polyurethane, which is very easy? Well, you know, the truth is, when I was in my infancy on lutherie, I did use polyurethane on one instrument. And I gotta be honest, at that time, I thought it sounded really good. Over the years, I've come to believe that the polyurethane probably isn't your best choice. It doesn't harden to kind of the brittle hardness that the other finishes do. That brittle hardness gives you that extra tone in your vibration. I doubt most people would hear the difference. I'm fairly sure I could hear the difference, especially all things equal. You know, if you had two guitars that were made out of the same wood exactly, made exactly the same, one finished with that, I could probably tell the difference by when I pick them up and hit them. Can't guarantee you in a blind test I could tell that, but I believe I could. It is that kind of difference. It's a very slight, subtle difference. It's the same thing though as the coated strings. Most people, you know, and I don't mean to pick out like I'm something special, because I'm not. In fact, my ear's probably not nearly as good as a whole lot of your ears out there. I mean, I know a lot of people hear things that I don't hear, but I hear pretty well on most things on these instruments. And I can pretty much instantly tell when I hit the strings if they're coated or not. Now, I would say most folks can't tell that. They wouldn't know if they were coated or uncoated. But I can hit an open phosphor bronze set of strings and then hit a coated set of strings, and I can generally tell that they're coated just by the sound. So that it's that kind of subtle difference. And everything adds up and everything matters. So that's why I use the two tried and true finishes. Oil varnishes, which take longer to dry generally, although the true oil gunstock varnish, they've added so many dryers to it that it dries pretty quickly. In fact, it dries nearly as fast as the nitrocellulose lacquer. The problem with the nitrocellulose lacquer is that it appears to dry, I won't say instantly, but it dries pretty darn quick. Within an hour or two, you can pretty much touch it. But it takes it days and days and days and days to cure. In other words, it dries for maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and it's still drying. And while it's still drying, it's still shrinking into those pores, which takes forever to get a good finish on those. The oil varnish, though, I have to be honest and tell you that it's almost as bad. I mean, it doesn't, the nitrocellulose lacquer seems to really emphasize the defect. If there's a little minor hole or a little anything, you know, a pore or whatever, it seems to spread away from that. That's the lacquer. The oil varnish doesn't seem to do that exactly, but it shows up the hole pretty good too. So it takes a lot of coats of both. And the oil varnish, especially the true oil gunstock varnish, runs at the drop of a hat. I mean, if you look at it wrong, it'll start running. I mean, you have to put it on so thin. So the bottom line is, I can say this with my hand on a Bible, finishing is the hardest thing I do on instruments, period. There's nothing harder than finishing. And on the other side of the coin, you could say, well, it's really very easy. You just put the finish on, and it is if you just look at it from that perspective. But if you're trying to get, quote unquote, a factory looking finish, it's about the hardest thing you will ever do. I wish I could tell you something better than that. Now, then we go to the debate on the fillers relating to the finishes. Here's my problem with fillers. First of all, they're way overhyped. You know, I've been talking to the owner of the filler companies several times now, in fact. And they've sent me their product. I've tried it, and it just doesn't do what they say it does. It doesn't fill the pores. It takes multiple applications to fill the pores. Well, if I got to put multiple applications, I might as well just put multiple applications of the finish. I don't see a benefit to most of the fillers. The few that do work that I found, I think Aqua Coat, was one of them that worked, but it turned the wood a different color. I'm not into that. I don't want that at all. It seriously turned the wood a totally different color. I went like, gee whiz. You find a filler that actually works, and then it just changes the color of the wood. The third thing you got to worry about with the fillers, besides the looks, because and not only will it change the color of the wood sometimes, but sometimes the pores themselves will be a different color because they filled in with something, and now you got all these dots all over your instrument. So you got that. But the third thing is what it does to your sound. And again, I go back to those two finishes that are tried and true: oil varnish and nitrocellulose lacquer. So that's why I suffer the big suffer. Because I am not using any fillers. I'm just using those finishes, and it takes forever. And I'm just telling you, it takes forever to get a good finish. Now, if you're using a real tight grain wood, like for instance, the top coat, the top board, spruce, it's really a fairly tight grain. There's really no pores to speak of. That coats very quickly with either one of those finishes. No problem at all. If you're using maple, which is a tight pore wood, you won't have any problem. My problem is maple doesn't really sound that good except for maybe on a mandolin, or a violin. It doesn't sound that great on guitars most of the time. So I don't typically use maple. I use on the backs of the guitars the Padauk, which is very open pored, which just compounds the problem. So it's a great wood acoustically. There it is. That's the problem I have with finishes. So in one hand, I absolutely tell you I am not an expert in finishes. Just not. On the other hand, that's my experience. I've been doing that for a long time, and I can swear by my experience. I can tell you for sure what I'm telling you is true. Fillers and me don't get along at all, just kind of like me and epoxy. I don't get along with epoxy. Yeah, and that's another kind of filler, by the way, is an epoxy filler. Those work, but I don't like them because of the fact that they are epoxy, number one, and the fact that I know some of the big makers use epoxy fillers, but I'm not going to do that. Well, another type of filler that actually does work is CA glue, but I'm exceptionally sensitive to the CA glue. That stuff goes through me. I get it. It hurts my eyes. It hurts my nose. And if you tried to pour, and I'm talking that in small quantity, spread that out over a whole guitar, and my gosh, I'd have to go to the next state. It would drive me crazy. It would work great, and I think it would even sound great because it's a stiff, hard filler. I don't think it would hurt the sound of the instrument. But I can't stay in the same room with that, so I don't use that either. That's my sad story on finishes. That's the best I can help you with, and I'm sorry I don't make it sound any better than that because, in my opinion, that's where you got your work cut out for you. Finishes really suck, in my opinion. And just one more side note on finishes, and this is probably is every bit of 20 years ago. I asked a guy, at that time I think I was getting $2,500, $3,500 for my mandolin, somewhere in that neighborhood. And I asked the guy, he was a professional finisher, and I said, what would you charge me to finish my mandolins? Because I knew he'd finished other instruments, and he did a great job. They looked wonderful, just like a factory instrument. He said, at that time, 20 years ago, $1,200. Now that's me getting it ready. It's perfectly ready. All he has to do is apply the finish. $1,200. That ought to give you some clue how tough finishes are. I put out a video recently about the bending iron and the fact that the plans are kind of available, are the wiring diagram, and then I showed connected it to a few videos. Some people were confused about that because I didn't really put it in the video itself. I put it in the description section where you click on that link. So if you watch that video and you don't know what I was talking about, go to the description of the video, click on the link, and it'll take you to the place. Now, where is it taking you? It's taking you to my website. That's what I didn't explain. I should have explained that. That I added that to my website page. So all you really have to do to get there is just go to my website, rosastringworks.com, click on the for sale, for lease tab. That's the only place I had to put it. It's not, you don't have to pay anything for this. Go to the very bottom and click on the link for the bending iron. It'll take you there and it's free. It'll take you to another web page that shows you the parts list and everything you need to know about the bending iron, on building the bending iron or whatever. I also called the fretboard removal tool, included that in there. And some people are saying, fretboard removal tool, what are you talking about? Well, maybe I didn't call it by the right name. That's what I call it, but fretboard heater, if you will, so that you can slide it. So in other words, you can make a fretboard heater also with those same components basically, and some minor modifications. So if you're interested in either of those things, the side bender or the fretboard removal tool, as I call it, you could go there. So again, that's just on my website. Click on the for sale tab, go to the very bottom. There's a link to the side bender there. In the last Shop Talk, someone asked me, what is a good book on building violins? Well, the truth is, I don't know. I'm not a librarian. And I don't do a lot of reading, I'll just be honest with you, because I've already told you I'm a very poor reader. This is the book I bought years and years ago. Before I ever really started building instruments, I bought this book right at the beginning. And it says, You Can Make a Stradivarius Violin by Joseph Reed. And it's got William Lewis and Sons down here. So there's a good look at it. I'll let you look at it. I don't know if the book is still available or not. I have not looked it up, so I have no idea. I felt like this was a pretty good book. It's got, full-size plans. It's got all kinds of things included in the book. So it's a great book from that perspective. It's worth the money, I'm sure. Have I looked at it? I really haven't looked at it in years and years and years and years. I don't use it as a reference book or anything anymore, but I did use it to build my molds and different things that I use to this day to build my violins. I don't build very many violins. I've only built 4 or 5. I don't really remember how many, but I have built several. Anyway, that's the book I've used. That's all I can tell you about it. If I could tell you more, I would. I also mentioned in I think the previous Shop Talk that Caleb's got his own channel going. I should have put a link in that video to his videos, so I will put a link in this video to his place there on YouTube, and that way you can find him. I never dreamed there would be more than one Caleb Mills out there, especially building instruments. So there you go. There will be a link in this description, so go there if you want to see what Caleb's doing. I've got a little bonus segment here for you. Nobody asked for this one. I'm throwing it in because I want to. Truss rods. Yes, that's a truss rod. Whoops. That's a truss rod, believe it or not. This came out of a... give some mandolin. I don't really want to name any names. But it did come out of a well-known mandolin. And F-style mandolin on top of that. And it's one of their top-of-the-line models to boot. What I really want to talk about, I'm not going to pick on them at all. I'm going to pick on the user, because people misuse truss rods like crazy. This is a truss rod. It's a piece of steel. How much are you going to stretch that? Once you get tight, what else are you going to be doing besides breaking something? Think about it. What else is it going to do once you get that tight? Just think about that in common sense terms. You get it tight, you're done. What a truss rod's supposed to do is to pull, when you tighten it, it straightens out a little bit, which lifts the middle and lifts and pulls that underbow out of your neck, or the relief out of your neck, if you prefer to call it that. That's all a truss rod does. It doesn't change the angle of your neck at all. So many people think it does. Truss rods, in my opinion, are the most misused and abused and absolutely screwed up things on an instrument. It's just wrong. And now that they've introduced that doggone two-way truss rod, it's just another way that people screw it up. Let's talk about this one first. This one specifically was pulled through a neck by more than a half an inch. In other words, it was supposed to be anchored in back here in the heel, and they just kept tightening it. They put a wrench on it and they tightened it, and it literally plowed through the neck. That great big thing there plowed through the neck a full half an inch. Once you get tight, folks, stop. I mean, seriously, because all you're going to do is break something. If you reach up there and you tighten something down and you go, wow, that's really tight, you're done. Stop. You're not going to get any more out of it than that. You can tighten it all you want, and all you're going to do is drag this thing through the wood. And you're going to bust your neck wide open, or you're going to create a problem. Seriously, 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 understand that about a truss rod. There's nothing magical about a truss rod. It doesn't do all the things you think it does. All it does is just pull the underbow out of your neck. That's it. And once you get tight, stop, or you're breaking stuff. That's all you're doing, you're breaking stuff. Okay. Maybe in the next Shop Talk, I'll get on a rant about those two-way truss rods, which absolutely should be outlawed, in my opinion. Well, my friends, we're getting very near the end, and I'm sure some of you are standing up with thunderous applause. I've got two more topics I want to talk about. One of them is Mountain View, Arkansas. We're headed back down there for just some jamming around the courthouse square. We do that usually once a year. A bunch of us from the Rolla, Missouri area. You've seen some of them in my videos that go down there and jam with me. And we meet lots of folks down there, and we jam with other folks. And we're going down there the first part of June. It'll be the June 10th through the 13th. We'll be returning on the 13th, that is. And anyway, if you are available to come down there to Mountain View, Arkansas, we're not hard to find. We'll be jamming there somewhere around the town square. There's a bunch of pavilions off to the one corner there, and often we're under those pavilions jamming. We typically go out for a dinner on a Thursday evening down to that JoJo's Catfish. And if you come early enough and get there Thursday, well, then you could probably go with us down there to the Catfish place to eat too. And then the final subject that I wanted to talk about today, which was mentioned in the last video, is tuning keys. And I just happen to have two sets of, these are not a matched pair, by the way. As you can tell, these has oval keys, this has round keys. But anyway, I wanted to show you the differences in tuning keys and things to look for in tuning keys. And also dispel a couple of myths about tuning keys. You know, people often say, oh, you don't want to oil them, they'll slip. That's not true. It's just flat not true. They will not slip because you oil them. In fact, tuning keys, for the most part, don't slip at all. A lot of people will argue me on that one. They'll say, my tuning keys slip all the time. Well, maybe they do. Anything's possible. I'm just saying, in general, tuning keys don't slip. There are some reasons why you have slippage issues, if you will, but the keys themselves typically do not slip. Let me show you some differences in tuning keys, and I'll try to explain to you why they really don't slip. They're designed in such a way where they just don't slip, typically. I'm not saying it's impossible for them to slip. I'm just saying 99% of the time they're not going to slip on you. So here's two different tuning keys. Can you see them up close there? Can you see a big difference there? And some of you may see it right away. Some of you won't see it probably for a while. But there's a huge difference there. Look how fine these are. Look at the teeth on these gears. Look how fine the worm gear is. Look at that one there. See? Much more coarse. It takes a lot more turns on this one to tighten up your strings. But that's also a much finer detail adjustment on your note. In other words, you can get this one very finely tuned in and it will take a lot more turns to get it up to pitch, but it will be very, very accurate on your tuning. You know, and I don't know what the ratio is on these. I'm sure it could be figured out. I'm not even going to attempt that. I'm just going to make up numbers here just for the sake of illustration. Let's just say this one is maybe a 10-to-1, and let's just say this one is a 20-to-1, just as an example. So in other words, that would mean it would take 10 turns of this one to turn the post around one full time. It would take 20 turns of this one to turn the post around one full time. The higher that ratio is, the more fine the threads are going to be here and the more fine adjustments you have in your tuning. Is that really that important? Maybe, maybe not. You can get pretty dang accurate with this one, just like you can get pretty darn accurate with this one. Fine pitch ones will probably last longer because the gear ratio, I guess, would make it easier to turn also. I'm pretty sure this one will be easier to turn than this one. The lower gear ratio on this one is going to make this one a little bit harder to turn. This one here, with that fine adjustment, it'll be fairly easy to turn. Now, that also depends on how well they're made. About the best made tuner these days that I know of, at least, is the Waverleys. Waverleys are really good. Now, when you turn them, they just turn like butter. I got to tell you, it's a different experience from turning those compared to the other tuning keys. And they also have a fairly high gear ratio. I think it's roughly 18-to-1, and that's just off the top of my head, guys. You can find it out when you go to StewMac's website. They sell the Waverly keys, and they'll tell you all the details in the specs part of that about the tuning keys. Okay, so why do I say they don't slip? Well, if you see how this works, you know, your string is twisting like this. And I'm talking about the tension of your string is pulling back on this and it's trying to twist this. How is it going to twist it? Because it's twisting against this perpendicular worm gear. The only way it's going to slip is if you see this thing start spinning backwards, and you aren't going to see that. It just doesn't happen. Having said that, I think maybe once in my life I saw that happen. But it was on a set that was really, really worn out. But, you know, honestly, that just doesn't happen. So you can't mechanically twist this. I don't think I could take a set of pliers and twist this as hard as I can twist it and get that to turn. It isn't going to happen. That's why they don't really slip. So why do they seem like they slip? Well, one key thing, absolutely, you've heard me say a billion times, is you always tune up to the note. Never, and I mean absolutely never, tune down to your note, because that introduces what they call backlash. Any good machinist knows about backlash. And backlash means, like, if you turn this back just a little bit, now it's loose, and this will slip then. So you always tune up. That keeps the gear tight. You always tune up to your note. That eliminates backlash. If you have backlash, your note will slip on you. For sure. Absolutely guarantee you. And it will seem like your tuning key is slipping. And it's really not. It's just the backlash in there. That's another advantage of the Waverly tuning keys. They have very little backlash. And backlash is really just the mating surfaces here between this gear and this gear. In other words, how tightly are they mated? Like here, I can feel a lot of wiggle here. There's wiggle and play. That means there's going to be a lot of backlash. I can twist this back and forth and feel the backlash in there. This one, it also has quite a bit of backlash. So even though this one's a much higher gear ratio, it's still not built that well that it would have no backlash. I'm going to go out on a limb. I haven't done this. Here's a fresh box of Waverly tuning keys. I'm going to just see if there's backlash in them. I haven't ever done this. It may have a ton of backlash. I don't think they do, though. Okay, and I got to tell you, absolutely none. Look at that. I mean, I'm spinning that, and it's not, there is none. I mean, like zero. You don't feel it even move at all. There's the difference. There is no backlash in those. Will it eventually have backlash? Yeah, sure, it'll wear in over years and years of using it. But right now, fresh out of the box, there is zero backlash in those. So try that in your, the next time you're ready to buy some tuning keys or something. If you happen to be in a store where you can test it, see if you can feel any backlash. There is zero in that. And there's a lot of backlash in these. Now, as long as you're tuning up to the note, you're taking the backlash out of the equation anyway. So is it super important? Maybe not. But the difference is you could tune down with these and have very little backlash issue. I still would only tune up with these, don't get me wrong. I would only tune up with even the Waverlys. But my point is, you will have far less issue with backlash with a very tightly made set of keys, and these Waverlys are very tightly made. So that's about everything I can tell you about tuning keys. I hope you found that helpful, but there is so many different kinds of these. 6 months ago, 8 months ago, a year ago, I talked about you guys sending me spare parts, and I would put them in my spare parts bin, and that's where a lot of this came from. I have tons of these now, and that's very helpful because as we restore these old instruments, every one of these gears is different on every instrument. And so I can go to that spare parts bin and search through and find a gear that actually matches something, Often it's not from the same kind of key or anything, but I can make it match because of the gear ratio or whatever. So that's been very helpful. Some of them, I don't know if I want to get into that, but some of them will even turn backwards the way they're made, depending on whether the post is in front or back. I guess that is important to know that, especially when you're buying vintage keys. Some of them will tune backwards, and you won't like that. So you want to check that out also. I don't know if I want to go much deeper into that, but just know that some of the tuning keys will turn the traditional way, and some of them will tighten backwards. That's just ugly. But that generally is pointed out on StewMac's website. So if you're looking for tuning keys there on StewMac's site, and I'm not sponsored by StewMac at all. I should be, but I'm not. But if you go on StewMac's site, they will tell you whether the keys tune, in the traditional direction or backwards. So there you go. Keep that in mind. Everything you ever wanted to know about tuning keys and were afraid to ask. There you go, right there. I hope you've enjoyed this session of Shop Talk. And I hope you'll tune in again. Tell your friends. Do me a favor and click that thumbs up button. It takes a lot to put these videos out. Thank you.